Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this session of CCOF. Our topic for today is leading from the front, and we have a very interesting guest today in Ed Benack. He is the Chief Customer Officer at Corecentric, and he has extensive global leadership experience in the tech industry and has managed and scaled sustainable, successful global businesses for large enterprises and award-winning organizations. In his previous stint, he was the Customer Service Senior Vice President for Cvent, who was responsible for the company's client success, professional services, customer care, and client training organizations. Prior to Cvent, Ed had led senior leadership roles in Acronis as well as Monster.com. And prior to that, he was the general manager for customer service for Microsoft for North America and then later Asia. And now an interesting fact is that before Ed joined the corporate world, he was a US Army officer stationed in West Germany. So with that, welcome Ed to our session. And as usual, we have our host of the day, MD, who's the founder of this session. And he has been an industry veteran for the last 32 years and an entrepreneur for the last 18 years and one of the pioneers of the contact center industry here. So MD was one of the first managing directors of Dell International Services in India. He's an alum of IIT Madras, Stanford University, and Stanford Business School. Sorry. Okay, with that, over to you, MD, to take the conversation forward.
Oh, thank you for that wonderful introduction, Renil. And Ed, welcome. It's wonderful to connect with you again. I know we go back a long way. I also know that you know India fairly well. You've been here for a while. You've been here in Bangalore as well as in Delhi, I think. And so you will relate a lot to the people out here. And of course, India has changed quite a bit and continues to change. But I think one of the things which is coming in, which may not have been as common in the days when you spent in India, is that the chief customer officer role is becoming more and more prominent. The best sign of that is that I see several companies now who actually have the title of chief customer officer, which wasn't common at all, even 5 to 10 years ago. So that itself is a very, very positive change which is happening. And these are senior executives reporting to the CEO, and the role is as critical, as you well know, as any other CXO role in a company. So that's a positive change which is happening here as well. And our forum, this forum is primarily for the chief customer officers, and also to evangelize the fact that customer experience is a core for any kind of business. And it, in fact, the attitude of delivering great customer experience spans right across the organization. It's not with any one particular department or division. And that's how we have this forum. With that, Ed, welcome once again. I'll hand this over to you and I'll go on mute, both audio and video. Please go ahead with your presentation. We'll connect after this deck with questions. I have a few questions, and I'm sure the audience, if they have, they will ask. And to the audience, please post your questions in the question and answer box, not in the chat box. I'll monitor it and ask Ed your questions. With that, over to you, Ed.
Thanks so much. It's really one of the pleasures of my life to be able to speak to this audience today. And I'm really honored, and I hope that you are able to take away a few nuggets. So what I want to say is, obviously for us, it's all about the customer, but for today, it's about the people who create a great customer experience. And that's really my myopic focus. So, as MD said, and Renil, that here's my background. My last company was Indian founded, and my boss was Reggie Agarwal, no relation to the sweets company, but he called me half Indian. So I've spent about 4 years of my life in India. As MD mentioned, I lived in Bangalore. I really get it. As far as the emerging chief customer officer, it's funny. Gene Bliss, who was a colleague of mine at Microsoft, 20 years ago. She wrote a book called Chief Customer Officer in 2006, and there's actually part of a chapter featuring featuring me, but in terms of my philosophies on customer experience. So it's a good book. I think she wrote a second version of it a few years ago. So please reach out on LinkedIn if you want to connect. I'd be honored to make all of your acquaintances. So we're gonna go through probably about a dozen topics very quickly, and feel free to ask any questions. I would love to answer them. So this is the agenda: prioritize your people, leaders eat last, walk the talk, data, live your business, the 4 Qs, plan versus execution, what effective execution looks like, what successful leaders have, what I look for in successful employees, and overall keys to success. So with that, what is leadership? So this PowerPoint is a form of a class that I teach called Leading from the Front. It's about 4 hours. This is going to be more like 20-25 minutes. And I really, the original audience is more for the manager director level. This, of course, I've catered more to the senior executive level. So I usually start off with asking people, what is leadership? And you get a lot of good answers to it. But really the definition is the ability to collectively motivate individuals to operate for a common good. I work for a company called Corecentric. I joined this year, and our CEO and founder is a fellow named Doug Clark. He is absolutely the salt of the earth. He is. This is a good man. He's quiet, but whenever he says something, it's very impactful. It's like really opens my, really blows my mind. So when I first had my one-on-one with him, he said, I have 3 philosophies: hire the best, empower them, and give them credit. And it's interesting because the longer version of this presentation absolutely harps on those 3 things. So from the very beginning, I knew that I know this was man that I absolutely could look to. So some of you may be familiar with the standard COPC, Customer Operations Performance Center. It's the world's highest service standard. The first time I was audited about 22 years ago, I didn't do very well, I'll be honest. I was an IT guy who was stepping into customer service. And I didn't really know anything. So we didn't do well on it. But Alton Martin, one of the co-founders of COPC, was one of our auditors, and he called it advanced common sense. And really, management techniques are advanced common sense. I started managing in 1978. You say, how's that possible? I actually had a grounds crew at a country club when I was in 7th grade. And interestingly, my first 2 employees are incredibly successful business people. But, and then my first sort of postgraduate management job was in the Army. I was a lieutenant in the United States Army over in Germany, and starting in 1985. So I'll make some references to that with some of my examples. So prioritize your people. This is advanced common sense. Of course, as a leader, you have to prioritize your people. Let me take it. Usually, I start my presentation saying, "I am not a leader." I'm happy to say I'm not a leader. I'm a manager. Okay, and the reason I know I'm not a leader is when we go to the escape room or any other organized activity, I'm the last person who wants to be in charge. Okay, but because of my role, as a manager, you sometimes show certain leadership skills, but the one thing is, when it comes to your people, don't cancel what they see as investments in them, whether it's a one-on-one, skip levels, town halls, team meetings, because that's their that's their valued time. And when you cancel it, one of 2 things happen. They either say, 1, I'm not that important, or 2, they rationalize it and say, oh, well, you know, Ed's really important. So sorry, he's really, he's really busy. So I understand it. Don't do it. These are little things that mean a lot to our frontline employees. Respect your people. Again, obvious. I worked for a guy named Steve Pogorzelski. He was president of Monster.com. He grew the company from nothing to over $1 billion. He is absolutely beloved by anyone who's ever worked with him. He was, he's a great, he's absolutely a great person, great business person. But we had an executive when I was at Monster who really thought she was above everyone else, okay, and acted like it, and everybody knew that. He shared with me later that he had a discussion with her once that said, you know what the difference between you and me is? You think you're better than the people who work in the mailroom. I don't. It's so true. He acted like that every day with everyone he's ever met, and there's a reason that he's such a great leader. Understand human behavior, okay? And we've probably all seen this before. I've had people, you know, coaching structured scored feedback is huge for me across not just support, professional services, managed services, customer success, customer training. Structured scored feedback is important, is hugely important in driving high performance. But on the other hand, people don't like doing it. It's hard, okay, and it requires some discipline. So I can't tell you the number of people who have said, well, don't give us a goal and we'll do more coaching, okay? Or just like, well, why do we have a goal for customer feedback? Why don't we just put it in? If you believe that, you don't understand the human condition, because people don't do it. People, I get measured on this, I don't get measured on this. Which one am I going to do? You're going to do the ones that you're measured on. So that's you know, that's true understanding of human behavior. And surprisingly, you know, and we've probably all got people in our management ranks who don't really understand how people act. So nothing good ever came from delaying an employee-related activity. I can't think of it. Again, I've been managing over 35 years. I have never seen a time where, well, I'm not going to promote someone right now. I'm not going to give them a raise. I'm not going to recognize them, and something could happen. I've only seen the opposite. A great example is one of our SVPs at a former company, and the CTO were having a discussion about a particular developer. And this developer was in a legacy technology, not very exciting. And they were talking for months about, well, we should put her in this new role with this cutting edge technology. And they're talking about it, never talked to her about it. And she put down her papers. So eventually they were able to save her. But the point is that, you know, act quickly when it comes to our people. You know, in general, nothing ever good came from delaying an employee-related activity. Real-time feedback, catch people doing the right thing. It costs you nothing, okay? And this is one of the interesting things. We've all been on email threads where someone says, MD did a great job, MD, awesome job. And everybody just keeps replying. And, you know, people, yeah, it's sort of a knee-jerk reaction. It means a little to people, but if you take everyone off there and just respond to that one person, okay, it means so much more. And the reason I know this is I've asked innumerable times throughout my career, which is, which one means more to you? And 100% of the people have always said the one that comes directly to me with nobody else on there, where I'm being recognized in private, not just part of some, again, knee-jerk reaction. This is one of the things I think I tend to do pretty well. I really look for the good, and I want to make sure that, you know, folks are recognized. And again, it in general takes you a few seconds. It's not about the time, it's about the discipline. You can't let the inmates run the asylum. Okay, I can't tell you the number of times, and this is my 5th software company, and I've had to run the same kind of playbook each time, because even at Microsoft, we didn't have very much. We didn't have metrics. We didn't have documented processes. I know it's hard to believe, again, this is the late 90s, but we really did not. And so we have to do things like labor tracking so that I can cost things out. How much is a support case? How much is an onboarding? How much is a implementation? It's the managers, oh, people aren't going to like this. Well, honestly, I'm paying a paycheck to do what needs to be done for the business, and this is part of it. You can't be afraid to make tough decisions, even if they're unpopular. Okay, I always say a good decision is one that hurts in the here and now and feels really good in 6 months. Leaders eat last. This is a concept, and think actually physically. Okay, you're at a morale event, okay, with all your folks. You should eat last. And so I ask the question when I'm teaching this, which is, why do leaders eat last? Okay, from a practical perspective, it's so that all of our people have enough and actually get their food before we do. Now, it's interesting, in the old time movies, war movies, you'd see the generals and the captains cut to the front of the mess line and get some food and then go over to a table and do some work. By the time I was in the Army in the 80s, that wasn't the case. It was leaders eat last. Okay, we were absolutely, you made sure everyone got fed before you did. So if your job appears to be easier than the people who work for you, that's not a good thing. Notwithstanding compensation differences. But I will tell you, my last job, okay, and even my current job, I wouldn't want my boss's job. Oh my goodness, it's just, it appears to be grueling, and what they're accountable for, and it's just, I'm fine. Okay, I understand they make a lot more money, okay, but I'm good, and that's what you should do. If you're doing your job right, it should be a job that people want to graduate into, but understand it's going to be a lot harder. Decisions should always be made with your people's best interest, your client's best interest, or your shareholders' best interest. If you're the recipient of the benefit, okay, that's probably a bad decision. Institutionalize accessibility to yourself for your people. I know personally, I'm not the most approachable person. Okay, I look very intense, and I get that, and I do things to make myself more approachable. But people have said I'm the most accessible executive they've ever met, which is, I have obviously an open door policy. In 35 years, I've never turned down a one-on-one. So frontline people will schedule one-on-ones with me. Absolutely the light of my life when I get to have a one-on-one with the front line. I think it's just, it gives me incredible insight. And I do town halls every month, but I also do roundtables, generally 8 to 10 people every quarter with all my groups. So my last company had 64 groups. I have about 20 right now, and I make sure that they have the ability to ask, why do we do X? Okay, or to share friction that they have in their job, because we'll talk about what managers do a little bit later, but I want to be able to help them make them more successful and certainly enjoy their job more. This is one of my favorite quotes. It's from Helen Keller. And she is, if you don't know who she is, she's a very famous American. She was deaf and mute, okay, but accomplished an incredible amount in her life. I would, if you're not familiar with her, I would suggest you look at her. She's the subject of a very famous movie called The Miracle Worker. So walk the talk. I think everybody understands that. So there are parts of our job that are easy and very fulfilling, and there are parts that just are not that great. Okay, I believe that you have to not shy away from those things. So this quote, I think it's from the Bible, but I'm not sure. One of my CEOs a couple of jobs ago. I guess I was complaining about something, and he said, "Ask not for a lighter burden, but broader shoulders." So I like that. The reason there's a picture on the right is when I was in the Army, my company commander, my boss, said, "You need to know everything that your people do." Okay, so one day he comes into the motor pool, the place where they have all the vehicles, and he's yelling, "Lieutenant Benack, Lieutenant Benack." And I pushed myself out from underneath one of these vehicles. And he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm changing track pads." Track pads are the rubber pads on these tracks that prevent these tracks from basically tearing up roads. And he said, "Why are you changing a track pad?" I said, "You said I need to know how to do everything my people do." He said, "Fine, change one, not 300. So, I took that to heart, and I really value managers who know the details. Um, you know, if I said to, if I said to MD, "You're at least average at everything," and I say this in the class, which is, I say, "How would you feel about that, Joe?" Well, I wouldn't feel very good about that. Like, this is probably the highest compliment I can pay a person. Okay. So in baseball, there are 9 players. Okay. On average, every team has 4.5 players above average and 4.5 players below average. Okay. If you have a team that has 9 players who are at least average, so average or above, that's not a good team. That's an incredible team. And the same thing with skills. Okay. We all have, hey, you do great quality deliverables, you're an excellent speaker, but all your deliverables are late, and you don't show up for work half the time. Everyone has pros and cons. And I've only said this to probably 2 people ever, which is you're at least average at everything. Doesn't mean you're not great. It could mean you're great at everything, but you're not below average at everything. So this is an important concept to we'll talk about, which is in terms of coaching people up. How do you move the mean in a population? Okay, you move negative outliers to the mean. When you do that, you move the mean. It's the same thing with coaching people up. If you can coach people up in their below average attributes, on average, they are going to be a much better contributor. Good results don't happen by accident. I've never seen it. Great managers get great numbers. Okay, you can't be a great leader and not get great results. Okay, I have never seen it, and by definition, you can't be. Hope's not a strategy. Okay, in other words, when you have to shape the future of your organization. Okay, it's not going to happen. I can just tell you that inertia, okay, and how people operate, you will see self-serving decisions like we talked about. Okay, you will see an unwillingness to do the hard things. You'll see a lack of discipline. Okay, in other words, personal and organizational discipline, and that's the reality of the situation. So you have to have those attributes, but hoping good things happen doesn't happen. The reason there's a picture of Joe DiMaggio, a famous American baseball player, on the right is because they had a saying. Joe DiMaggio roamed center field for the Yankees for 15 years. He never dove for a ball. They all came right to him. And I know you can relate to cricket and diving for balls. Of course, that's not true. He must have dove for balls before. The point was, he was such a fabulous baseball player, and he was so disciplined and so well prepared and so smart about where to position himself. It appeared that it was very easy for him, but it was a lot of hard work, to be honest. So my friend Alton Martin, again, when my first audit, he said, "In God we trust, all others bring data." So if you're not familiar with, I call him Edward Deming. He's the founder of modern TQM, Total Quality Management. He tried to get Detroit, the American motor capital, to adopt TQM processes in the late 50s, and they all said, go away. So I went to Japan, and at the time, made in Japan was synonymous with bad quality. Okay, like when I was growing up, made in Japan meant poor quality. He brought the TQM techniques to the Japanese auto manufacturers, and within a decade, they surpassed American quality. Not even a question. That was really probably the early 70s. A fact without data is called an opinion. So as leaders, you can't ask for incessant data for everything to make decisions. You are going to have to learn from your experience, okay? But at the same time, you should always validate with data. In a lot of cases, you don't have the data. So you're making a decision with no data because you're not doing something, for instance, okay? You haven't put a particular process in place. So, but always, once you do have the data, always validate it with it, because what does that do? That makes your gut much better. It strengthens your resolve. So defend decisions with data. Okay, so we're going to talk about something a little bit later that is related to this, but it's a lot of times we're making decisions, drawing opinions based on anecdotal information. Okay. And I've always found the best way to counteract that is bring the data. Understand calculated risks. I worked for the phone company 30 years ago, and there was one group that no matter what you wanted to do, they were pretty much contrarian. Okay. And they would say, well, this could happen. The sky, the sun could not rise tomorrow. Okay. Or all these crazy scenarios that were highly unlikely. So, it's when you're making decisions, understand the risk. Is this a real risk? Okay, with real ramifications, or is this just some incredibly remote scenario that is unlikely to happen? That's interesting. It skipped the bullet. Have a facility with numbers. I expect my managers to be good at numbers. I expect them to understand that certain numbers move together or don't move together, or they move in opposite directions. I expect them to be able to do approximation, back of the napkin math. And it's one of the questions that I was asked when I was at Microsoft, and I actually use for the managers for several different reasons that I won't go into right now, is suppose you have 200 fish in a bowl, 99% of them are bluefish, the remainder are goldfish. How many fish do you need to remove to make it 98% goldfish, bluefish, sorry. And I asked that question, again, for a variety of reasons, not some that are not obvious, but I'll let you think about that one. So Doug Clark, our CEO, when I first joined, he made the comment, we use a lot of adjectives around here, not so many numbers. So I'm just, I like that, which is, and I saw it this morning. I was just in a meeting before this, and one of the guys said, well, this is a huge problem. How big a problem is it? How many people does it impact? That's odd transition, but bound quality with quantity. So MD closed 10 support cases yesterday. I closed 20. Who's the better employee? You don't know. MD closed the 10 cases and they all got very satisfied surveys. Okay. I closed 20 and they all had to be reopened, and ultimately we get very dissatisfied surveys. So people, everything you do has to be, you always have to bound quality with quantity. Live your business, real-time management. This is one of the key skills I look for in management. If you are finding out next month that this was a bad month, okay, that's not good. Okay? You shouldn't understand, was yesterday a good day or a bad day, and understand why. You should, in certain businesses, intraday, you should understand exactly what's going on. And we'll talk about how to do that. Know your business better than your boss. And so this is something I try to do, which is know my business better than the people who work for me. If I'm telling you things about your business that you don't know, that's not a good thing. Okay. So that you've got a backlog, okay, that you have a customer sentiment issue. I expect that you know those things. So that's sort of my goal, is because I believe it, understanding your business at from top to bottom, highest level to lowest level, is important. And we'll talk about some ways that you can do that. So this is Bill Gates. I work for Microsoft. I was lucky enough to be involved in operational reviews with him before he stepped down from as CEO in the early 2000s. He and Ballmer were pretty incredible people in terms of their intelligence. So I would say 15 minutes into your presentation, he understands your business better than you do. Why? Well, he could interpolate and extrapolate. He understood human behaviors. In their minds, they could piece together a business of what exists and what doesn't exist in a very short period of time. That's what we should all strive to do. Create processes to understand your business better. So again, I joined Corecentric this year. We're working towards this. We don't have the sort of the data and automation that I need yet, but we'll get there in fairly short order. But my last company, every morning at 7 o'clock, I got an automated, we had a data warehouse. I had an automated report that showed me all the negative outliers across 64 lines of business. Okay. Longest untouched, highest labor implementation, just every outlier. Okay. And again, that's how I manage variation management. I look at the negative outliers and I focus there and move those to the mean, because that's the way you can constantly improve. I was on a meeting with some investors at one point, and I said, I've never had a number that didn't go up and to the right. And that's what I do, is variation management. Start with the negative outliers. Talk to your customers. I know this seems obvious. We're chief customer officers. We should be talking to customers. It's interesting. I would tell you that not everyone in our roles probably talk to customers as much as they probably should. EMC, the computer company, had a saying. EMC stands for executives make calls, and so I like mentioning that. That's a great attitude. So how do I talk to customers? Sure, we all get escalations. I'm on those calls, but we have something called the 4 Qs, where we're proactive, where we're proactively talking to customers. So at least once a week, I reach out to a customer to ask for 15 to 20 minutes of their time, and I ask them the 4 Qs. And the 4 Qs are: how are you doing? That means in their business in general. What's going on in your industry? What do you hear about us from competitors? And how are we doing? What's the strength of the relationship? And again, this comes from a book called Scaling Up. I highly recommend it. It's sort of like a greatest hits of management techniques. It references, Malcolm Gladwell, Jim Collins, Marcus Buckingham, all the thought leaders in management. It references a lot of those. So if you want to read one book, I recommend Scaling Up. The interesting thing about these questions is they lead in a whole host of directions. Very interesting. What you take away from it, and I document it, and then I share my findings with the executive team on our staff meetings on Tuesdays. So I strongly recommend this approach. Very simple, very structured, and you will find out things that you never imagined that you would find out, both about their business and industry, and them personally. Frankly, one of my first discussions was with a senior procurement executive from a very large chemical company, and he said, by understanding my business better and my industry better, you are able to better serve me. I took that away, and that was one of my first discussions, and that's I found that to be true. So General George S. Patton this is one of my favorite quotes, because I really believe in this. I do not like waxing philosophic, planning incessantly, spending all your time to do something, thinking, okay, we'll talk about it. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So this is something I like to look at. So concept versus execution. So a lot of times when I come into a company, I'll say we should do X. They said, oh, well, we thought about that, but we didn't do it, or we tried that and it didn't work. You really need to look at whether, was it a bad concept or did you just not execute? A good example of this was when I joined my last company, we had about half my folks were in India. I had about 800 people in India. And I noticed that people spoke local language on the floor. And I had not seen that before. I'm used to, you speak English. Obviously in the North, there tends to be more homogeneity among language with Hindi, and in the South, you have more diverse languages. So I said, that's really interesting. I said, I don't have a problem. Our folks we had incredibly high standard for English, so it was not a problem. I said, but why don't we do that? And the manager said, well, we tried and it didn't work. And I was thinking to myself, you try something that every major company with a presence here does successfully, and you couldn't make it work. It was really, made me say, well, okay, maybe I shouldn't ask this person to execute different things for me, because you can't get something that everybody else can make work, and you couldn't. This is one of the biggest things here, is get the rock rolling. The hardest part of getting a rock to roll, okay, like pushing a rock, is the first inch. Just get it started. Okay, if when I have an assignment, I have to write reviews in the next week or so. I don't think too much about it. I just start typing, and then I start rearranging and say, oh, well, I need to add this thought here, and it goes much quicker. And short cycle times. When I make mistakes, one of them is that I say, hey, I need you to do X, okay? And I don't check in, and all of a sudden 6 weeks go by, and they've gone down a completely different tangent. So have short cycle times on check-ins, okay? So maximum 2 weeks. If you ask someone to do something and it's fairly laborious and takes time, people can start straying off from the original vision. And if you don't have those check-ins, it's tough to course correct, because you're way off course at that point. Errors of commission are almost always preferred to errors of omission. I'm fine with people trying and failing. The most successful people in the world have failed the most, okay? To me, it shows you're trying, okay? Because action's much harder than inaction. Errors of omission means I just chose not to do anything. And we'll talk about why people may do that. Because self-imposed ambiguity. MD asked me for this deliverable, but I didn't know if he wanted it for year to date or year over year, so I didn't do anything. You say, this doesn't really happen. Oh yeah, it happens all the time, which is the people use their own self-imposed ambiguity, like creating questions in their mind to do nothing. Okay, so create a culture where that's not allowed. You want people who are actions. A fellow I worked with named Scott on the errors of commission, he goes, hustle fouls are encouraged. A hustle foul is in basketball where you're trying really hard to get the ball and you accidentally, nudge someone and it's a foul. It's called a hustle foul. Okay, and he was a big believer. Hustle fouls are absolutely okay. It shows you're trying. I'd rather have that than the opposite. Good is better than perfect. Okay, perfect doesn't exist. People are going for perfection, will never be happy, and will just continue to iterate. And the first 90% of something takes 90% of the time. The last 10% take 90% of the time. So good enough is perfect is the enemy of good enough, is the old phrase. So I totally believe that. A roadblock syndrome. So I remember years ago at the phone company that we had this group there where they would just throw up roadblocks. Well, that means you'd have to do X. Yeah, that's part of doing this project. You have to do that. Okay, but they present it in such a way that's a roadblock. No, it's an action required to achieve something. So a required action is not a roadblock. I had a boss. His name was Art, and he said there are more brains outside my head than inside my head. And I remember vividly. And I, luckily, I had always I had never thought of it that way, but I definitely use that approach. We'll talk a little bit more about that on subsequent slides. And don't bring a problem to your boss without a recommendation. It makes your job your boss's job. And I'm pretty sure you're not going to give up your paycheck, part of your paycheck, because they're doing your job. So if you're the boss, really coach your people to come with recommendations, versus just the problem. What are successful leaders? They get stuff done. They get results, as we said, which is in America that we have little baseball cards that have a picture of the baseball player on the front and that has all their statistics on the back. And there's a saying that you're no better or worse than the back of your baseball card. In other words, whatever you've achieved, that's who you are. You're not any better, you're not any worse. Managers set strategic direction. They create the statement of direction, the mission and vision. They say, well, this is what the purpose of this organization is. They get resources. Okay? We require headcount. We do staffing plans, capacity plans. But at the end of the day, only the boss can get the resources. And they clear roadblocks. So when people ask, well, what do managers do? They set strategic direction, they get resources, and they clear roadblocks. And lastly, they continuously evolve their business. Okay, they're never satisfied. Great managers, great leaders are continuous improvement freaks. Okay, they always want incremental improvement. Okay, and there's always room for it. So my first year at my last job, there was a guy named Manish Pandey who came up with the theory that the difference between a very satisfied survey response and a satisfied survey response is attention to detail. And the corollary to that was, as we get close to festivals and holidays, our attention to detail goes down. And the data actually proved that out, which is that 90% very satisfied all of a sudden became 83, 84%. There was always a drop right before a major festival like Holi, Diwali, Dussehra. It always happened. And it was, so that's something I learned, after working for, 25, 30 years in the business. I never considered it. And so I learned something from that. And again, the data proved it out. I'm often asked, what do I look for in employees? And I'll be honest, I used to hire some of the worst people to ever hold jobs. I would fall in love with CVs. I would fall in love with certifications, and I would really overlook probably obvious things. My brother was a senior person at Microsoft, and he was. I had hired one of my first hires at Microsoft was not a good hire. And my brother's a very serious guy. He was the worldwide controller for Microsoft. And he looked at me and made hair stand up on the back of my neck. And he said, Microsoft doesn't appreciate people who don't hire well. And I learned to interview. And I don't think I've had a bad hire since then. I'm very happy with the folks that I've hired. So what do I now look for? A good heart. One of the things is I had an EA at Microsoft, and her office was next to mine. And anytime I had to interview someone, she would tell them, Ed's running late. You can just wait in here. And she had a chair in there, and she would strike up a conversation. This woman was salt of the earth. This woman was as as good a person as you will ever meet, very humble. And she would strike up a conversation. She'd say, how was your drive in today? And if they said, fine, and like went back to looking at their phone, or, oh, it was good. Well, where do you commute from? And strike up a conversation. She could detect respect. And then I would interview the person, and then I would ask her, is this a good person? And she would tell me yes or no. She was a a detector of goodness in people, and she was definitely right. So self-awareness. I asked a question, if I ask your boss, what would they say you do exceptionally well? Okay, what would they say are 2 or 3 areas of opportunity? Strangely, there are people who cannot answer that question. I had a CMO candidate who practically went into a fetal position when I asked that question. They could not say anything bad about themselves. Culturally, this is a little bit more common in India. I'll be honest, but because people assume that they're throwing themselves under the bus, and in reality, I'm looking for the opposite. Excuse me. The people who are most successful, they know what their strengths and weaknesses are. Okay. A question I ask is, tell me about a business failure that you've had. Okay. Bad decision, bad project, whatever it is. The worst answer is, I can't think of any. The best answer is, oh my goodness, there have been so many. Let me just think for a minute and give you one. That's a winner. The person who answers that second way is a winner. Good logic process. Is the sky blue in your world? Say, well, of course it is for everybody. It's really not. Okay. There are folks who just think very differently about, just like that human behavior I talked about 10 slides ago, which is there are people who believe crazy things, in business. And I look for a good logic process. Hard work makes up for a myriad of sins. I also think speed is an asset. So I like to consider myself ability to create very quickly. There are people who, the combination of hard work and speed is incredible. You can have people who work hard, long hours. Okay, and I always question people who work truly long hours. Like, let me help prioritize certain things. There are certain things we could probably push off your plate or don't need to be done. They aren't value added. But if you have someone who works hard and is fast, they can move mountains. I believe in work-life balance. If you're working long hours, there is one guy who I worked with at 3 different companies who just lived for his job. He would work 16 hours a day. I mean, it was crazy, and that's how he validated himself. But that is a rarity. Okay, I want people to feel good about their job and their life, and that they have time to do things. I like people who are resourceful. Okay, they don't have to come to you with every question, which is they just figure it out. They're creative in their approaches to solving problems. And one of the ways you can do that is the intelligence of the masses, which is along the lines of there are more brains outside my head than inside my head. I rarely, deliver a deliverable that I haven't circulated to my direct reports. They'll catch things. They'll catch syntax errors. They'll catch missing words. They will catch the fact that I'm trying to paint a picture from A to Z, and maybe I left out C, D, G, and Q. Okay, in other words, in my mind it connects all the way, but in my writing it doesn't necessarily. So I leverage the intelligence of the masses and intellectual curiosity. This is called I wonder. So my data manager from my last job, he would tell you there wasn't a day that didn't go by where Ed wouldn't come in and say, hey, I wonder if we're doing this when this happens. Just like every day in the shower, I'm washing my hair, I go, I wonder. So I like people who are very curious about things, because they don't assume things, and therefore they tend to find issues and be able to correct them, because if you can't find an issue, you're not going to correct it. Last slide. These are the things I really believe in, which is regularly scheduled, structured one-on-ones. I have a one-on-one forum. It starts with priorities and goes all the way down to manager feedback. So, and I started writing this in about 1995, and I've iterated on it. It hasn't changed radically, but it has changed a bit over time. And it goes through priorities, assistance needed, things you should know about, just and goes to like PTO time, when you're going to be out of the office. I have found this to be as close to a silver bullet for having a healthy organization as anything I've ever seen. Continuous structured scored feedback, also known as coaching. So everything gets coached. If you're in service delivery, everything gets coached. And so that implementation, that onboarding, that training session, that support case, everything gets coached. That's the only way to improve individual and organizational performance that I have seen. You can have all the, by the way, on the last one, you can have all the processes and all the documentation on what you should do. If you're not checking it, it's just not going to happen. It goes back to that human behavior thing I mentioned. Live your business, real-time management. Okay, create processes so that you can understand your business in real time, and you're never blindsided on what's going on. Understand and interpret data. Okay, understand what the data says. Know what things move together, don't move together. I mean, somebody showed me data the other day. I said, it's just wrong. And they're like, how do you know that? Well, because I know this, if this number goes up, this number has to go up. You can't have an inverse relationship. Yeah, they had the wrong numbers. So, create predictability. Employees love predictability. They really do. And so we have something called rhythm of the business, which is, when do we do one-on-ones? When do we do skip levels? When do we do town halls? When do we do business reviews? And, I always say, we do something until we decide not to do something. I hate things that die in the vine. Hey, we have a new program. 2 months later, we're really busy and we don't do it. That's probably the biggest sin in my world. But the employees like predictability. What happens when something's not predictable? Humans tend to focus on assuming the worst. There's something called check the box activities. At my last company and this company, we do something called stakeholder review. Once a month, 30 minutes, everything you ever wanted to know about client services for essentially the senior management and executive teams. At the last company, if 3 people came, that was a big deal. We always sent the deck out. People tended to read it. I know that because they would reference things in it, but they didn't come to the meeting. My current company, everybody comes. And at the last company, one of my directs said, why do we even do this if nobody comes? I said, I don't care if nobody comes. Okay? The words I never want to hear are, I don't know what's going on in CS, or CS is doing something crazy. If you create that vehicle for transparency, you don't get those sort of questions, and you don't have to deal with, BS, I'll be honest. So the check the box activity is something that you should do just so that you essentially, are covering your bases. Okay, it's not a lot of work, I'll be honest, because it's 20 minutes worth of work. So Jeff Rakes was the head of sales for Microsoft in the late 90s, early 2000s. He said great leaders have the ability to distill things to their essence, basically simplify things and make them understandable. And I agree with that. I had a fellow named Ahmed who worked for me a few companies ago. He could take some things that were so complex and just simplify them into processes. And just like nothing I'd ever seen. 85-15 rule. You have to be able to operate your business with 85% of your time. Okay. The other 15 is to evolve your business. How many times have you said, well, have you thought about differentiating services? I haven't had time. I'm so busy with the job. Okay. You have to be able to, you have to carve out that time so that you can do strategic initiatives or operational imperatives. And You just have the discipline to do it. Your life, your world can't be, I'm too busy chopping down trees to sharpen the axe. Okay. You have to have the discipline to run your business with only 85% of your time. And the last one, global thinking. Think, well, this is obvious. Everybody does this. Really, almost nobody does. I mean, my latest, company, we were very acquisitive. We acquired a lot of companies, and everything sort of operated, basically independent of each other. We had support in one system, we had customer success in another system, and we had other groups who had no system. And the salespeople, they didn't know if there were escalated bug tickets. They didn't know what the customer health score was. They had no insight into it. Okay. And so, well, how did that happen? When you don't think globally, about things and like the big picture, this happens. The support people thought they were doing a great job being in Zendesk. Okay. The success people thought they were doing a great thing being in Strike Deck. Okay. And they didn't understand the implications of that. So anyway, that's the last slide. I'm sorry, I don't know how we're doing on time, but I wanted to share those thoughts with you. I hope that you're able to take at least a couple of nuggets away and maybe influence how you manage your business. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Ed. There were not a few nuggets. There were so many nuggets of interesting information and interesting tips over there. So thank you so much. I'm going to actually have a few questions for you. And in the meantime, those who are listening in, please post your questions in the Q&A box. We'll extend the session by maybe 5-10 minutes, if that's okay, Ed. So yeah, I think I'm going to turn off the deck now, so just the two of us can talk. Let me see how to do that.
I can stop the share.
You can do that. Yeah.
There we go.
Okay, great. Yeah, you had some very interesting kind of recommendations, thoughts on dealing with employees. I think there were some fascinating pieces over there. How do you deal with outsourcers and employees of outsourcers, especially in our industry? There's a lot of outsourcing which happens. The principal typically has a small team of 5-10 people, and then has a few hundreds outside in an outsourcer. Outsourcer has their own brand and their own kind of way of thinking and people practices and all those good things. How do you deal with that?
So one of the things that I had when I was at Microsoft is a benchmark team. So in other words, I had approximately 2,000 people, but for every line of business where I had outsourcing, I had one team internal that did exactly the same thing. And so therefore I could hold the outsourcer accountable for quality and efficiency. I could peg what the MPI should be. It's so that's one way. The other way is obviously fostering a relationship. I've had, I've worked with Arvado and Michael Landon most recently, and the really connecting with leadership and having that trust there and working together through things, is important. In terms of the specifics of how you get to a result, I care about the result. Okay, if they want to do overcoach, for instance, they're more than welcome to. At the end of the day, you have to start with the result. You have to focus on the what, not the how. And so I've always had really good relationships with my partners, and it really starts with having that executive connection, and also being able to, if you outsource 100% of something, you can be told anything. Well, the types of issues are changing, and so therefore the MPI is going up 30%. So therefore your cost is going up 30%. So you have to be able to benchmark it.
Yeah, and that's a good practice. You say that you have a kind of a smaller team within your organization, which kind of does the same thing.
Usually one team, you don't want a lot of transition in that team, so you want to pay them probably a little bit more than you would if it was just part of a normal transactional team. They also, they're the ones who go over to the outsourcer to train. they'll do QA. They serve a variety of, they'll write KB content. So you want to try to make their job really interesting, and not that they're just doing transactions all day. It's maybe 60% of the day they're doing transactions, and 40% of the day they're feeling special because they're doing value added things.
How involved would you get in their people practices?
Of an outsourcer or my own?
Yeah, outsourcer.
That's a good question. Again, it's if their attrition is reasonable, okay, probably not that, if their performance and their attrition is reasonable, not that close, okay. I did have a partner who had over 100% annualized attrition, and I did definitely need to get involved there and understand, what's going on. Is there actually something about the role itself that is causing this? Because then I have to look to myself for this. But I think that I focus on the what, not the how. If there is something that, if the what is not working out for me, okay, I will get involved and explore, deeper. I will ask them for exit interview surveys, things like that.
Sure. Now you talked about managing, people who work for you. How about managing your bosses? How do you deal with difficult bosses? Let me ask a very direct question.
That's interesting. I don't have a lot of one-on-ones with my boss. I shouldn't say that. With my current boss, I have one every 2 weeks, and I keep notes, and I have a very structured approach to it. I tend to manage my boss by being proactive. Okay, I do not want them to coming to me with, "Did you know about this?" It's what I talked about in there, which is I don't want my boss to know anything more than I know. Okay, and I'm very transparent, which is when something's not going well, I will pass it on and say I'm on it, and usually that's good enough. In terms of, I would say that's the number one thing, which is if you're proactively communicating, okay, and early, okay, you tend not to have problems with bosses. I mean, I've had a wide range of bosses. I think that I think that's the number one thing, which is making sure that they trust you, okay, and doing everything that you can to make sure that they never question your motives or anything what you're saying. But as part of the longer deck, I talk about the military standard of integrity. If you're a military officer and and you mislead, exaggerate, understate, okay, those are compromises on integrity. And if you're an officer and you do those things, it pretty much happens once, and then you should expect that you're not going to be in the military the next time that you need to move up to the next rank. You have to present everything as objectively as possible. And so that and the proactive communication, I would say, are the two best ways to manage my managers.
Sure. You talked a little bit about hiring people and what you look for in people, and you also gave the example of a EA being very good at kind of assessing people. You gave that example as well. But how much time would you spend in hiring a person?
I tend to like to do panel, not with me personally, but I like to get a person in front of as many people as possible, but at the same time, not make it a death march. So I just, I've been on a few of those, okay? And so I tend to pair people up, have them be focused on specific things. So I was hiring my business manager several months ago, and I have a guy who worked for me at 3 different companies, and woman who's very EQ, emotionally intelligent. And I said, okay, I want you to focus on how they would work with me. Okay. You know, in terms of these two people, I want you to focus on kind of operational expertise. I want so lay out a plan ahead of time. Get them in front of as many people as possible. Require copious feedback. I mean, I've seen, you know, I've seen interview feedback that says, good to go, you know, hire him. Okay. I will tell you this panel, probably if you collectively stapled together all the pages of their feedback, it was probably close to 20 pages. It was incredible. They were so thorough. And I definitely think I got the right person. And so I take it very seriously. I am a behavioral interviewer. I you know, ask situational questions, and it's again, the biggest thing is self-awareness. If someone says, you know, what are your weaknesses? If you ask what are your weaknesses and they say, I can't think of any, okay, my next question in that interview is, so do you have any questions for me? Which is signal for that's the last question. So that's just how I do it. I need people who are comfortable in their own skin and can say bad things about themselves, because I can tell you all the times I've messed up for the next 2 days. So.
Yeah. Final question, Ed.
Sure.
This is specific to the last, whatever, 2 years, 18 months, when you know, work from home has become the norm. How much has it? And the question is more related to the US side of you know, things. How much has it really affected customer-facing professionals in the US?
You know, not that much. I mean, a lot
Oh,
of it hasn't. You know, we've started doing some face-to-faces, but you know, it's almost hard to think back to March of 2020, and you know, we thought the world was going to end in terms of business because we wouldn't be able to do anything, and we all kind of figured it out. I would say that if you're a data-driven organization and you can measure things, and you would have been in much better shape than if something where it's more warm and fuzzy, and not, you know, essentially countable. So I think we were in pretty good shape from that perspective. I did have a couple of lines of business where 90% of the volume went away. So we wound up essentially creating essentially an 800-person company that did projects. Okay, all the things that companies never get to. Oh, we should do this and we should do that, and they just never get to it. That's what we focused on. We had, I don't know, 150 initiatives, cleaning
wow.
up things, and so we ran it. It was about an 800-person company, because 800 people. I had a very large on-site group that their job was, when there's Dreamforce, I send 100 people. Okay, when there's you know, this other conference, I send 30 people. You know, they actually ran the technology for it. They had obviously no work. I mean, went from 100 to 0 in a week, and then other adjacent things like the mobile app group, 90% of their work went away. So that was the biggest thing, is finding work for them at the time. But ultimately, at my last company, we pivoted to hybrid meetings, and that really began to pick up. So, but again, the biggest thing is if you can measure your business, you can hold people accountable for it. And we didn't see any sort of systemic issues that created inefficiency.
Okay, cool. Okay, we are kind of
No.
8 minutes,
I
you know, over time as
apologize.
well. Thank you. No, not at all. It was fascinating. As I said, you know, this is being recorded. It's going to be shared with all our members. So are you okay in the deck being shared as well, Ed?
Yeah, the PDF I shared with you. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. We'll put that up as well, because this recording is going to be available for everybody. It'll be there on LinkedIn. I think all of us know where it'll be available. So thank you very much, Ed. That was fantastic. In fact, I want to go through this recording myself, because there was so much you talked about. It was. I'll do that as well. So once again, thank you for the time, and thank you to Freshworks for supporting this event. And with that, let me hand over to Renil.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ed. Thanks, MD, and thanks, Ed, again for that insightful session. I hope, like you said, people can take away nuggets from this and really help to this session. So thanks everybody for joining in once again on a Thursday evening. Our next session is on December 16th. We want to do the last session before we hit the holiday season, and this is going to be the last session for the year. So please do tune in for more information on the session. Once again, thanks Ed, thanks MD, thanks everybody for joining in.
Goodbye. Thank you. Bye-bye.